Over the weekend, a funeral service was interrupted by a staff member at a crematorium in order to berate mourners for moving their chairs and sitting too close together. It was a grieving widow. Her son wanted to be close to her and put his arms around her. Craig Bicknell revealed that he had moved his chair in order to comfort his grieving mother at the funeral of their father, Alan. But it wasn't long before a member of staff interrupted the service by waving his arms and shouting at the mourners to move the chairs back. Have another listen.
I therefore offer you all a very warm welcome as we unite in love and friendship to...
You have to put the chairs back, I'm afraid. You can't move the chairs to yourself.
You've got to put the chairs back. You can't move the chairs, I'm afraid. Did he not use his loaf? Did this man not have an ounce of humanity? Don't give me the obeying orders malarkey. He was a bit following the rules, of course, but has the government now lost all common sense over COVID? Ella Whelan is a columnist at Spiked Online. Ella, you've seen this video as well. It's just distressing from pretty much every way you view it.
As an example of the kind of thing that's happening, I think in many areas it's very upsetting. But I think we need to zoom out a bit and say that this is what the government wants, in terms of they have pretty much mandated the idea that snitching is something that everybody should do, curtain twitching and watching what your neighbours are up to, reporting them to the police if they have, as you say, more than 6 kids over, or friends that aren't sitting 2 meters apart, or whatever it is. And so unfortunately, there are some people out there who have this tendency to rather blindly follow rules. And that's now being put forward as a virtue by government legislation. The idea is that we should all be the kind of bureaucracy, mad, compassionless, common sense-less people who simply follow rules. And I think most people in the situation of the funeral would understand that whatever the risk of the virus, in that particular instance, 2 people were taking, especially her son, was taking the decision to take a risk in terms of coronavirus and do the more important thing, which was be there for his mother.
Indeed.
And if we're not able to make those, the problem is, I think, that the government seems to think that the public just needs hard and fast rules. The rule of 6, the curfew, whatever it is, simple rules that we can stick to because we're simple people. But of course, that's not true at all. And what would be far better is a belief and a trust in the public to make the kind of sensible decisions that they need to make in order for our lives to not be utter miseries. Because of course, being unable to properly mourn at a funeral is a misery. My husband lost his best friend during the pandemic, and I had to sit out in the car park and wasn't able to go into the service with him because I was the limits meant that you just couldn't go in. And so that has a real lasting effect on people. And it's weighing up I think it's not inhumane to at this point say we have to weigh up the threat of the virus, which is very real, and the danger that it poses, with the threat of the regulations that are supposed to be protecting us from the virus, which are also having really negative effects on our lives. And
the lunacy, of course, of this particular situation, Ella, is that one has to reasonably assume, in fact, I think the son even said this, that they arrived in a limo with their mum sitting next to her in the back of a car. They'd been staying at the same house with their mum, so they're part of the same, that rather annoying word, bubble, that's entered the lexicon almost without question. They'd all part of the same bubble. And that wasn't even thought about by Matey, who pitches up like a WWE wrestler to break things up when he sees rules breaking down.
But this is, I remember Boris Johnson using the term common sense in a speech. Correct. Probably was a number of months ago. And there was mass outrage at the use of that word. Commentators across the board on all channels were saying, how ridiculous. I can't believe he expects people to be, we need hard and fast rules. We can't be dealing with common sense. And of course, this is the consequence, which is that if people aren't allowed the space to make allowances, to weigh up the situation, to break the rules, which I think would have been entirely appropriate in this instance, break the rules and let the family sit together, for God's sake.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they're rules anyway in this respect, because, the family were a family, and the 2 metre thing, which has sort of slowly crept back in, it was moved to 1 metre plus, wasn't it? And then suddenly I was barked at by a barista in a coffee shop the other day because I was apparently less than 2 metres from the person in front of me. And she went on to bark at several other people as well, which made me feel slightly better. But nonetheless, I mean, this rule was sort of relaxed in the name of common sense. And now it appears everyone from, well, the coffee shop to the crematorium are re-employing it with added vigour.
I think that most people want to do something to, they want to feel like they're, if not following regulations, being part of, that sort of feeling that was in the air at the start of the lockdown when there was a genuine sense of solidarity and we were having mass conversations about people volunteering for their neighbours. And even though the clapping for carers became a bit jaded, at the start it had this sentiment that we were all in it together, and thousands of people signed up to be volunteers and all that kind of thing. I think that people still feel that, but the problem is we've been battered for months by a government that is saying it's doing everything it can to protect us, but is kind of essentially, I think, flailing in a kind of panicked way, and it quite clearly doesn't have a coherent plan with how to deal with the virus. So you've got that tension all the time, which is that ordinary people out there like you and I want to do something about this, want to get life back to normal, are very worried about this virus still killing vulnerable people. But at the same time, I really can't stand much longer of adhering to rules by a government that really don't make sense, either in scientific terms, in terms of the numbers and the data and what seems relevant to deal with the threat level of the virus at the moment, and in terms of managing our daily lives.
Well, the 10 p.m. curfew, I understand, wasn't rooted in any kind of science. This was very much a political move. Perhaps the government thought or felt they needed to be seen to be doing something and somehow conjured up this curious 10 p.m. curfew, not backed up by the science. And of course, today we understand several Tory MPs, maybe in cahoots with some Labour MPs. It'll be interesting to see where Labour go on this. But, is there any chance, do you think, can you ascertain that they're likely to overthrow the government on this? It looks unlikely, given the majority that Mr Johnson has.
I think not just in terms of the numbers, but I think it's unlikely, and I'm depressed by it, because we are completely lacking a political opposition at the moment. And I don't mean that I want someone to pick holes in Boris Johnson or the cabinet's ideas just for the sake of it. But there's been squabbles about whether or not these measures should have a time lapse, the nature in which they're being instituted, the Brady Amendment sort of row or non-row, as it turned out, from last week. But the problem is almost all MPs agree that there should be some regulations. And actually, most of those who are challenging the government are saying, well, you're not going far enough. Part of the row about the 10 p.m. curfew is lots of people were still saying, well, why the hell are you letting people go to the pub anyway? There's no one putting forward the kind of alternative view, which is that perhaps this strategy we have of a continuous lockdown, be it regional or national, isn't working. And so what I'd quite like is some political opposition that genuinely challenge the strategy or the kind of pretense of a strategy that the government has at the moment, and has more space for saying this very difficult question that it's hard to ask, which is what level of risk are we willing to take? At what point are we going to accept that this virus, as everyone keeps telling us, is something that we have to live with? And I don't want to go back. I don't want to go to a new normal that sort of sounds increasingly dystopian with, enforced social distancing and not being allowed to sit next to each other at funerals. But a normal, when are we going to get back to actual normal when we can actually live like social beings that we are?
Indeed. Ella, great to have you on. Thank you. Ella Whelan, who is journalist, columnist at Spiked Online. Speaking, I don't think you'd be able to put a hole in the points that Ella raised there with us. That was all, I think, very fluent, impressive stuff that most of you, I'm sure, would think, yeah, that just makes... It's common sense, isn't it? We were told, as Ella referenced, to employ some common sense. But are you sensing now it's the government that have lost all common sense over COVID? Sorry, Mr Johnson, you've got a lot of supporters out there who want you to succeed. It's your support base that is disappointed with you. It's people who voted for you, people who put you in to number 10 that are disappointed. This isn't the Boris Johnson they thought they were going to get. This was Harry Wright's funeral. We can speak now to Craig Bicknell, his son, who's with us now. Craig, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you.
Thank you for taking a moment to just speak with us, and huge condolences to you too on the loss of your dad. I mean, there's no easy time to lose a parent, and there's no words that can fully address the impact of that. And of course, a dignified goodbye is what we all hope for. I've been there in that situation. This must have been a shock. It's a shocking thing to happen, to lose a parent. It's a shocking thing to have to arrange a funeral. Who thought they'd be doing that? And then to compound all of that, putting aside the social distancing, just moments into the service, it's interrupted. What did you think was going on at that point?
I wasn't quite sure what was going on at that point, but I just sort of heard a door open and then just sort of heard someone. I looked round and heard someone shout, James, because he knew the celebrant's name, and I just heard him shout James, and then sort of walk at us with some pace and a bit of aggression. And at first I didn't know what was going on at first, and then it didn't take me too long to work out that he wasn't happy with me trying to comfort my mum after she broke down in there, and decided to intervene and push us apart.
I mean, this was just incredible, because bearing in mind, I'm not even sure this man, whoever he was, he looked like a bouncer, for goodness sake. But I'm sure you've been making, there's dark humour in all of these things. I'm sure you've been making the same observations. But I'm not even sure he was right, bearing in mind you travelled in this car with your mum. You'd been staying at your mum's house, as I understand it, so you're part of the so-called bubble. I mean, you weren't even breaching rules, right?
No, we wasn't. As I say, when my dad took unwell, it was he passed away on the 18th. It was on the 16th. Me and my brother obviously rushed to my mum because it was in the middle of the night when we had to get an ambulance out, and where we got admitted to hospital and we wasn't allowed into the hospital, we decided to stay with my mum for the next few days, where we had a bit of a rough time. And then when he passed away on the Friday, due to organising everything after somebody passes away, which was a tough time, we decided me and my brother, just to stay with my mum for the time leading up to the funeral. And as I say, then with the funeral director, we arranged the funeral, and the celebrant come round to the house.
Yep.
And we travelled in the limousine together, and we were pallbearers together, me and my brother, and stuff like that. So yeah, we was all together.
Was there any point, because one of the things I thought was, in a curious way, I thought it was very decent of you all to kind of do what the guy said. I'm sure you've looked back and relived that conversation. Would that be reasonable?
Yeah, it would be. It's a hard situation to be in when you're put in that situation there. I've never been, obviously, I've not lost a family member before, and so obviously that was a tough time as it was. Now, when you sort of meet somebody, the mannerism that he had, the way he come at us, I know if I would have reacted, rejected it, refused, or in any way, shape or form tried to cause a problem with the guy, it wouldn't have gone down. It wouldn't have ended well. I could just tell that straight away. And I didn't want to give him, I needed, just from looking at my mum and family members, because my 15-year-old daughter was in there and she got really upset about it.
Yeah.
I just needed to carry on with the service because he wouldn't have let us have a service. So I had to carry that on and then stand up and do my eulogy straight after, which was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
I'm sure.
With the guy looking at me through a bit of glass.
So Matey was at the other end of the room still looking.
Yeah, they go. So basically, when you're sat in the crematorium like that, there's a room watch. Well, as I say, I still don't know what he is, whether he was security doorman or worker there. He watches you through a glass window, and
for goodness sake.
Yeah, you get watched the whole time through the glass window, and then they obviously intervene. But I was made rest assured, because I lost one of my close friends a couple of weeks prior to my dad, so I was in that exact same hall the Friday before with my friend, so I knew the conditions that were, and I didn't see that guy there then, but nobody sort of moved their chairs then. But I did make everybody aware after my friend's funeral that my mum will need support. I did let the funeral directors know. Yeah. I did let the celebrant know and everything like that, and so I made people aware, and the comments made from everybody were, no one's ever going to stop a service if you sit there with your mum. And then everybody was shocked, the funeral, the celebrant, everybody.
You didn't get a chance to see Mask Boy at the end of it all?
No, I mean, I didn't wait. I went outside. My priority was just my mum after.
Of course it was.
Just so lost and shocked. So we went outside, and the limousine was there, and a lot of people that knew my dad gathered outside the crematorium, so I went and paid my respects to them and thanked them for coming and showing their support. And then I did weigh up going back in there, but again, that sort of guy, it wouldn't have been much of a conversation, and no. I'm not sure quite how it would have gone down. So I thought it would be best to come away from there, wake up with a bit of fire in my belly, which I haven't had lately, and tackle it the next tackle it the next day.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a curious way, I doubt at the time you expected this to have the kind of the publicity, but I hope in a positive way, because there's an awful lot of support and love for your family out there as a result of this, Craig. And
Yeah.
I mean, I hope in a curious sense that kind of helps the injustice along a little bit, or helps address the injustice a little bit, because it was. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it. There's no precedent for this. I was uncomfortable even seeing the way that everybody has to sit to start with, let alone some fella coming in. That in itself doesn't look good. How is your mum doing? I'm bound to ask.
Mum's okay. I've had a bit of a crazy day, so I decided to leave my mum's and go back to my family home today, because there were so many sort of reporters and a couple of TV interviews taking place and stuff like that.
Sure.
My mum's just not strong enough for stuff like that, so I've just come back to my mum's now, and she's coping. She was a bit shocked after it with everything that's going on, but we've got me and my brother here, and we, like everybody else that's been through it, we're just being there for her and just getting through it. That's what our decision was. We're stronger in numbers, and the three of us together will get through it together, and that was the idea of before, during, and after.
Well, we'll raise a glass to your dad as well, on behalf of all of us, and again, our condolences. Give your mum a big hug for us, and thank you for speaking with us, Craig. We really appreciate that. Craig Bicknell, who's the son who was at the funeral that we're talking about, who tried to comfort his mum, only to discover a big old bouncer said, "You can't do that in here, sir." Wow, just wow.